Serious, what is something scary that has happened to you that you cannot explain rationally? I live in a condominium and we own 2 apartments on the 7th and 8th floor. The only way to move in between them is to step out of the apartment, take the elevator or the staircase and enter the other one. One night, we ran out of ice cream upstairs and my mom told me to go get some from the downstairs freezer, so I took the keys to the 7th floor's apartment, and since it was dinner time, no one was there. I walked into the pitch dark and realized that someone was sitting on the sofa, so I flipped the switch to see my dad just sitting there. It was kinda weird, but I just went to get the ice cream and asked if he had a key to lock up. No answer. I shrugged and thought, well, if he came in and locked the door behind him, he must have one. Went back upstairs and my dad was sitting there eating dinner. I freaked out and asked how the heck did he get up here so fast, and everyone told me that he's been here all this time. Told them it wasn't possible cause I just saw him downstairs, but no one believed me. Now I never go down there alone. Edit. To clear up some stuff, each our apartment doors are fitted with 3 types of locks. There's a gate which has its own keyhole and lock. We put another lock in it, so you have to unlock this gate twice. Then there's the door and its own lock. So you need 3 keys just to enter our house if no one is inside. I did get a good look at and it was 100% my father. He's kinda fat and has this serious looking face, so it's kinda hard to mistake him. The apartments are not accessible because not only are they not on the same floor, they aren't even located on top of each other. There's an elevator in between them and they are on different floors. So there is no way for anyone to go up or down without first meeting at the elevator or the staircase. I was home alone for a weekend a few years ago while I was still in high school. After school one day I was driving home, and when I passed in front of my house I thought I saw some old lady in white clothes in my sister's room looking through the window. I thought it was stupid, so I went in the room to check out what it actually was, but I couldn't find anything. I pretty much forgot about it until later that night I got a call from a very panicked and scared neighbor saying there was some old lady pacing back and forth in my sister's room. I still have no idea what it was, and I've never seen anything like it since. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and coddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote. But, he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. My family owns a decent-sized horse boarding facility, and when we first had it going we used to do bed check as a family. Bed check is just making sure all the lights and fans were off, as well as looking at the horses for injuries and if they had blankets during the winter. Well, we had just got back from eating out and it was a moonless night during fall. As we stepped out of the truck, this large light gray mass stood up and took off loping towards our pastures. It was about the size of a single cab pickup truck. It made no noises other than it hitting the ground as it ran. The only other proof that it was real to us was the horses that were turned out that night screamed and stampeded across the pasture it had jumped into. We did a double count of all the horses that night and not a single one was missing. I still have yet to see it again, and I hope I never do, or at least there is some explanation for it. When I was in uni I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a house in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing of walking places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would walk to, often between 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. since I was a massive night owl. Well, one day after finishing an essay at about 2 in the morning I decided I was hungry but didn't really have anything easy to cook, so I decided to walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab a pie or something. However, as soon as I opened my door I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding, I started shaking, the works. Telling myself that this was ridiculous, I walked out to the street with the intent to still go, but that was as far as I got. I was terrified for no reason that I could understand, but no less intensely despite that. I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Later the next day I heard about a group of drunk guys that were causing havoc down near the intersection at the 7-Eleven. They'd beaten up someone from my uni. Even though I can't explain it, I'm convinced something bad would have happened to me that night if I had ignored that feeling and gone anyway. Probably too late, but better late than never. So much weird stuff like this has happened to my family over the years. Particularly with my mom. Below are a couple fan favorites. My parents had been married for maybe a month. They were in bed sound asleep when all of a sudden, my mom jumps up and wakes up my dad. "Jimmy. Jimmy. There's blood everywhere. We have to help them. Please." My dad tried his best to calm her down and figure out what she was talking about. My mom had explained that she saw a car with a German license plate on the side of the road. That there had been an accident and they needed help. My dad tried to console her, to explain that it was all just a bad dream, but she wasn't having it. So to appease her, they got in the car and drove to the spot my mom thought the accident was. And sure enough, at the exact spot my mom said, there was a car on the side of the road with German plates and emergency flashers on. Upon closer investigation, there was nobody in the car. If they needed help, help had already come. My parents had just had their first child, my oldest sister, Kathy. They had been living in Italy at the time. My dad was in the Air Force, and had brought her back to the US to introduce her to the grandparents, my dad's parents. So their first night there, my mom was asleep in the front bedroom, jet-lagged. My dad had gone out to hang out with his brothers. And in the middle of the night, this woman walks into my mom's room, waking her up. She sits down on the bed and says, "Shh, it's okay. I just wanted to welcome you to the family." My mom was scared, obviously, but figured this was some relative or family friend or something that came over. The woman walks over to the bassinet where my baby sister was sleeping. "Is this your daughter?" My mom nodded. "She's beautiful. It's lovely to meet you both." And then she leaves. My mom wakes up the next day and is having breakfast with my grandmother when she brings it up. "Who is the woman that came over last night?" My grandmother had no idea what she was talking about. My mom told her the whole story and my grandmother asked what she looked like. My mom said, she was tall, had long white hair and was wearing a blue dress. My grandmother's face went as white as a sheet. She rummaged through some old pictures and pulled one out. "Is this her?" she asked my mom, who nodded in return. "That's my mother. She's been dead for 20 years and we buried her in a blue dress." In my childhood home I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear Mom typing away at the computer. One day I got up and called out to Mom assuming she was down there working as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there, so I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse as if someone was frustrated. One morning I was eating my breakfast when I heard Mom at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try catch whatever was causing it and to try discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom, to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years and we learned just to kind of live with it as it wasn't every day. I was down there once when the ceiling light globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared. The whole mysterious typing, you know. If I hadn't ran I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time I was on the computer at home by myself when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder near my ear. I've never ran so fast in my life and was hesitant going in that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, not scary. Still makes my heart race when I think about it today. Have never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something in which scientists don't have a proper explanation for yet. TLDR ghost was a proficient touch typer who had a breathing problem. Probably too late, but here goes. I was working at a hotel in Albuquerque, the graveyard shift. I had been talking to the security guard and he asked if he could get a ride home, so instead of waiting for 30 minutes for my shift to end, I just left and left a note for my boss that said I left early because my brother was stranded outside of town and needed me to get him. Total lie on my part, but I needed a good excuse to leave early. I drop off the security guard at his place, then go home and go to sleep. A couple of hours of sleep and I wake up to my phone ringing. It was my brother. He tells me he is stranded outside of town and he needs me to go get him. I tell my brother the lie I told my boss and how much of a coincidence his calling me is. He says that's not weird, he will show me what's weird when I get there. I get there and ask him what is weird. He puts his phone up to my ear and plays a message that he got when he woke up that morning. It's a voice that kinda sounded computerized but mostly just creepy sounding. It says, "You're stuck, freaked us both out." Never figured out where the call came from. Strangest, creepiest thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I'm a little late, but screw it. I was in first grade, hanging out at recess with a friend. He was shooting some hoops outside and I was playing DS, sitting on the pavement. I remember him asking me if he could make a shot from halfway across the court. I told him he could try, but he probably wouldn't make it while looking at my DS. Suddenly, my dad asks me what I mean, and when I look up I'm sitting on my living room carpet, talking to my dad, and it's dark out. I was sitting in the same position, playing the same game, same level, and same exact spot in the level. Everything continued normally that night, and I didn't tell anyone at the time, but looking back it is really freaky. I thought it was a dream for the longest time, but thinking about it didn't really feel like a dream, and I don't really remember dreams that well. TLDR, teleported through space and time once. Pretty sure I lived in a haunted house for a while. Strange things. For one, I always felt like I was being watched in my room, and if I had the door open to the hallway I would swear I'd see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye. We had 2 cats and someone they'd be in my room sleeping and then all of a sudden they would sit bolt up and stare at the door, and nothing I did could move them for a long time. This happened often. One day in my bathroom the shelf that had my sister's beauty stuff randomly lose hold of all of the items. The thing was the shelf wasn't loose or hanging and all the stuff had to bounce out of a 2-inch high lip into the sink. One time in the middle of the night my sister's 100-year-old dresser she got as a gift from our grandma just fell over. This thing weighed a ton and it was built like a tank. Sister said she heard the sound of someone pushing. Mom and sister used to yell at me for sneaking around the house, only I wasn't home or I was in my room. They said they saw a man in shadows that was about my height. One day we also ran into the old owner and my mom casually asked the lady if she had ever experienced anything in the house. The lady started crying and said no one believed her, but yes, she experienced a lot of stuff. I moved out around that time. I do not miss that place. In 2002 I lived in the East SF Bay Area with my husband and 2 toddlers. I was grieving over the sudden death of my mother a month before. She'd had a major heart attack and died at 52 years of age. On an average day, I left my babies at home with my husband to run a quick errand by myself. I drove a block over through downtown Hayward to hit up the grocery store. I was on my way home and stopped at a red light waiting to make a left turn. The intersection had all blind corners so it was difficult to see oncoming cars. My light turned green, I glanced both ways, waited the appropriate second and stepped on the gas pedal. It would not move. I tried again. Nothing. The car behind me honked. I looked down under my pedals quickly to see if something had possibly rolled under the pedal and found nothing. I looked up and suddenly a huge work truck loaded down with equipment ran his red light at what must have been 50 miles per hour. I was stunned. I gasped, quickly pulled myself together, stepped on the gas pedal and it worked with no hesitation. Suddenly I smelled my mother's favorite perfume. Really amazing experience. There was a small door that led to attic space in my bedroom, 11 years old to 13, and it became habit that I would shut the door as I walked into my bedroom a couple times a week. I didn't think anything of it, just assumed my mom didn't close it all the way when she left it. After a while I made the mistake of joking with her when she made a comment about me not picking up after myself. I said something like, "Every night I have to close the attic door behind you. How about you shut it all the way when you're done?" She then informed me that she hasn't been in the attic in months. Asked my brother. Nope. Asked my father. Nope. So then I started to pay really close attention to it. Making sure it was closed in the morning, checking it after school, checking blaster dinner. Then head up to bed and open. After a couple months of wondering, studying, experimenting, I thought I'd see what happens if I just don't shut it. Opened the door before school and checked it after school, still open. Checked it after dinner, still open. Before bed, still open. Now I'm laying in bed, mind going crazy with the open door across the room. Decide to check it out, so I roll over and focus on the black space into the attic. To see a face staring back at me. Bolt downstairs, wake parents, get ridiculed by brother, switch bedrooms brother, move into new house about 6 months later, due to expanding household. New physics teacher and his wife bought our house. I could have forgotten all about that event and chalked it up to me having an overactive mind. But then my senior year I discovered how awesome our physics teacher was. Became my favorite class and by far, my favorite teacher. End of senior year my friend and I took our VHS camcorder around town, doing mostly silly things, but then took it to my old house to see what they've done with the place. We got a very fun tour. I got to tell stories about all the projects my dad did that were still part of the house. Then the wife leads us upstairs to show us the sewing room. I ask, jokingly, notice anything strange in this room? And her face goes blank. On camera, she asks what I mean and I try to shrug it off but end up saying something about the attic door. She confirmed that every time she comes up to sew, the attic door is open. She then tells us that the second day of being in the house, their dog, German Shepherd, had gone into the room but would not go back downstairs. He started barking and could not be consoled, and then jumped through the window, landing on the tin roof over the porch and then running off. The dog did not come back until the next day and has not stepped foot into the hallway that leads upstairs since. I had the initial thought that I could show my parents and brother the story I had on film, but I decided to just let it be. Added a few extra details to satisfy the curious. Attic is the space in this house that runs parallel, like a Cape Cod, to the second floor, not above it. I was 11 and 12 when this was going on, so I did not immediately science it all out. When I told my family that I saw a face, it was just my brother that ridiculed me. My father definitely would have checked it out for actual humans, because one of the first comments he made was about a family that recently had a coin collection stolen from their house across the street. This event itself was easy to shrug off because I could chalk it up to a lot of other possibilities, like the ones mentioned below. It wasn't until 5 years later that it became freaky. The look on the wife's face before she told us about the dog was very telling. Like something they decided to never put much thought into. Now my story added depth to their experience and their story added depth to mine. This did not make me a believer in paranormal. I told the story as a collection of details, not as a confirmation of ghosts. What it to do was make me never be able to be a non-believer. Thanks for reading. Edit 2. I thought the blaster dinner comment was a Reddit reference that was over my head, like most of them. But just reread my story. Nice. Edit 3. Last details. The face was expressionless. I did not see a body, just what appeared to be a dimly lit face staring at me. The door was an actual door, just smaller, 2'X4, with a knob that has to be turned in order to open the door. I do not have a VHS tape from 20-something years ago. I moved a lot after high school and the tapes did not make it through. Call the moves. Happy Halloween, everyone. In 1975 I was flying an Army helicopter doing night training in blackout conditions near Fort Hood, Texas. I was flying down a draw with a small seasonal creek in it, which was the new paradigm, designed to mask the aircraft from Russian radar. I was at the controls, my co-pilot on the map. We were low and slow treetop to treetop. Suddenly I had the compelling sure knowledge that I must do an emergency climb, which I did, climbing almost vertically. As I pulled the guts out of the aircraft and with my nose pointed up to the stars in my chin bubble, I observed the leaves of a cottonwood tree being pressed aside by the plexiglass of my chin bubble. After a couple of seconds and now a few hundred feet above the canopy, my co-pilot and I stared at each other with wide eyes and the knowledge we barely avoided death. "How did you see that ducking tree?" he asked me. I never did tell him that I didn't, because I have never known how to explain it. I went on to fly helicopters for 37 years, accident-free, and I still can't explain what happened that night. 7 years ago I lived in a 2-story farmhouse. It was built in 1908 and was both large and old. I was packing clothes and putting them in a small unused bedroom. I was wearing my MP3 player and, the last time I checked, it showed 3/4 battery life. I was on my fourth, or so, trip and was hauling a load of shirts on hangers. It occurred to me the closet was empty too. Perfect, I'll just hang them back up in there. This closet was almost a second room. It had a short glossy wooden door. The area was thrice as long as wide, with hardwood floors. The lacquer still smelled, even though I'm sure it was fresh 100 years ago. I ducked fully inside and thought, this is a weird little place to be. Suddenly, the music doubled in volume and changed to something that wasn't music. It was like, I don't even know, rapid nonsense. Fast electronic babbling. It scared the entire duck out of me. I flew straight out, looked at my player and it was dead. I'm a pretty rational guy. That MP3 player would sometimes show more battery life than it actually had. It's done that before. And maybe the sounds were some sort of malfunction before shutting down. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I'm telling you. It shocked and frightened me to the core. My skin felt electric for an hour after. I never felt comfortable in that room again. TLDR, entered a creepy closet, MP3 player screamed gibberish and died. So, I was staying at my aunt's house in Mexico. My cousin's room had 2 beds so I slept in there. I remember not being able to sleep well and I had a bit of pain coming from my thighs. I had sweatpants on and somehow had scratches on my inner thighs. Almost like a bunch of cat scratches. My aunt came in and searched the bed for anything but never found anything that could have scratched me. She also noticed that I had a bit of bruising on my neck, as if someone had tried to choke me. It was just me and my cousin, definitely freaked me out and I rarely ever go visit my aunt anymore. If I do, I stay for a few minutes only. Sorry for bad formatting, I'm on mobile. After my grandpa died, my grandma said she could feel someone getting into bed with her nearly every night, but we didn't believe her. One night I was watching TV in the living room trying to fall asleep when I heard footsteps in the hallway leading to my grandma's bedroom. I looked out into the hallway and couldn't see anyone, and this happened for probably a minute. Immediately after the footsteps stopped, the TV turned off. I stayed awake for another hour or so but didn't hear anything after that. The house I grew up in was about 100 years old by the time my parents bought it. I lived there until I was 16. For as long as I can remember, I saw what I described as a girl that was pink and see-through. I always called her Pam. It's been 10 years since I lived in that house and I still remember her vividly. My dad got a bit weirded out when I would talk about Pam, and finally when I was 13, my mom put me in therapy because Pam was still something I brought up regularly. In order to stop my parents from thinking I was crazy, I just stopped talking about Pam completely and went on with life. That was until my parents decided to put the house up for sale when I was 16. Just 2 weeks before moving into our new house, I was sleeping, but was woken up by Pam standing in my doorway and pointing into the bathroom that was directly across the hall. All Pam said was, "Look, my mom." And when I looked to see who she was pointing at, I saw a woman hanging by a cord from the light fixture in the bathroom. I remember the woman looked as though she had been hanging there for a while, when all of a sudden the woman's boot fell off and I abruptly woke up. I ran into my parents' room to tell them what happened, and my mom looked at me disappointed because I was talking about Pam again after having kept quiet about her for years. I concluded that it was just a bad dream and went back to bed with no other incidences. Until a few days later. I was once again asleep, and dreaming that I was woken up by crying coming from the bathroom across the hall. I got out of bed and walked over to see what was going on. At that point, I saw the same woman that was hanging from the bathroom light fixture, sobbing and holding a very real little girl under the water in the bathtub. It was then that I realized that the little girl was the little pink see-through girl I had seen my entire life. It was Pam. And she was not moving. I immediately woke up and I was crying uncontrollably. I was 16 years old, and I ran into my parents' room like a 5-year-old, and jumped into bed with my mom. My dad was working at the time. I told my mom what had happened and my mom could see how upset I was and was trying to calm me down. At that same moment, the pink and transparent version of Pam walked through the door. I looked at my mom and just whispered, "Oh my God, Mom. She's in here," and I pulled the covers up to my neck and just looked at my mom terrified. My mom was speechless. At that point, Pam slowly walked up the side of the bed and began shoving me into my mom. I had never been touched by Pam before. I was screaming and crying and kept yelling, "Stop touching me." And all that my mom could reply was, "I'm not touching you," as she was being pushed out of the other side of the bed. After what seemed like forever, Pam stopped and slowly walked out of the room. I cried myself to sleep, and my mom stayed awake to see what else would happen. I never spent another night in that house. But, 2 weeks after we moved out completely, the house caught fire. The entire backside as well as the entire garage burned. The official cause was spontaneous combustion. The house that my family lived in for 25 years has since been bought and sold 8 times within 10 years. No one wants to stay in that house, and I really think that Pam is the reason why. TLDR, that sinking feeling you get when you think someone unseen is watching you, isn't always wrong. Hunter/mountaineer here. It was a chilly December morning. I hiked in, pre-dawn, taking about an hour and a half to go 3 miles off the beaten trails. Got to my nest about half an hour before sunrise and started to settle in. The wind kicked up and a fog rolled in that was thicker than milk. Within a few minutes, my visibility was 5. I'm sitting tight, huddled up against the freezing wind when I start to hear twigs snapping close to me. For no apparent reason, what is normally a rapturous sound indicative of an imminently successful hunt, sent a frosty chill down my spine. I chambered around in my lever action 30-30 as quietly as I could, and lay flat on my back tucked against a fallen tree. The rustling was moving closer through the fog, but I couldn't see anything. The sun was starting to peek over the mountains to my east and visibility was starting to increase. The rustling of twigs and leaves was sporadic, sometimes directly in front of me, sometimes behind or beside me. I remember laying there, rifle across my chest, thinking to myself how silly it was to react like such a coward. I rationed with myself that bears and mountain lions are a rarity where I was, and I had likely stumbled into a herd of whitetail that had bedded down. I decided to sit up. The rustling stopped immediately. As it was fully dawn by now, I was looking through the fog for the outline of my prey, which I had assured myself was literally all around me. It wasn't. Seemingly, nothing was. By now, the fog had faded away and it was apparent to me that I was alone in those woods. I hunted all that day without seeing so much as a squirrel. Around 3 in the afternoon, after fighting the wind and an abnormally cold day, and not wanting to hike out by flashlight, I decided it was time to start back to the truck. Walking out of those woods was the most uneasy I have ever felt. Lawfully, once you make it back to the trail, you're supposed to clear the chamber of your rifle. Not that day. What is normally a stroll through the woods, I undertook with the seriousness of an animal being stalked. I would walk, then stop and listen. I never heard or saw anything during my retreat, but I could feel eyes on me. I was about 100 feet away from my truck, when I rounded the last corner and saw, hanging at eye level from a tree by a noose, a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. I'm a giant, broad-shouldered outdoorsman. But that one shook me something fierce. What's the scariest thing that happened to you when in someone else's house? I once spent the night at a friend's house. His drunken uncle shook me awake and then my friend as well with all the noise he was making. I opened my eyes startled to see a gun to my face and he demanding who the F I was. I was scared speechless and just looked at my friend hoping Hex chip in for me. He did. He said, "Uncle. That's my friend. Chill. Uncle. That's my friend." His uncle then put it down and just walked away as if nothing had happened. He was drunk. Hey, Big Smoke, it's me, chill. I was house sitting for an aunt of mine while she was on holiday. She told me there was a leak in the lounge area but it was fixed, so if there were any issues to let her know. A massive storm happened a couple nights in. I heard some trickling in the early hours so I went to go check that there wasn't a leak. The entire wall was flooding with water, like an actual waterfall. Turns out the spouting was blocked and the water was just forcing its way through the cracks in the wall. I knew it wasn't my fault, but it was so terrifying watching someone's house fall apart on your watch, just piling towels on the floor and shifting furniture to keep everything dry. I was at this stranger's house to give him some money for accidentally hitting him on his bike. I was also on a bike, and the first thing I notice is that his house is really dark. Not in that his lights weren't on, his house didn't have lights at all. No ceiling lights or lamps or anything. Homeboy legit used a flashlight around his own house to get around and find things. Next thing I know, this guy who I've spoken maybe 100 words or less to is showing me a straight up two-handed sword and matching dagger that are both razor sharp. This is one of those people who have a harder time being quiet than thinking of things to say, and next thing you know I've been into every room in his place and met his pet parrot the size of a ducking eagle. The reason I was there in the first place was to replace a handmade Italian seat for his bike, and he ended up giving me a pair of $30 gloves, the old gloves that got a few scratches on them when I hit him, 5 to 10 high-end protein/power bars, and a glass of strawberry lemonade. Definitely a strange experience. I wasn't in the house, but just outside it. I went to visit my paternal grandmother at her house. She kept the door locked, so she had to come over to unlock it when I arrived. Her living room has large windows that overlook the street, and you can even see the door from there, so I could easily see her and she could see me. My grandmother was frail and suffered from arthritis, and in fact she passed not long after this. As she was walking to the door, she fell down in the living room. I had no key to the house and I was freaking out. I had no idea what to do. I was ready to freaking break the living room window in or call 911, and she somehow managed to climb back up using furniture to prop herself back to a standing position and open the door. After that day I demanded a key to the house from my parents. I hate to think what would have happened if she didn't miraculously get back up. I felt so helpless. Nearly as hopeless as the time my maternal grandfather fell crossing a busy street and traffic was starting back up down the street. At least that time I was able to prop my grandfather up and carry him over to the side of the road before the cars reached us. Moral of the story: watch for your elders falling. The first time meeting my boyfriend's family, who live in another country, we stayed in his old attic bedroom. In the middle of the night, he reaches over and shakes me awake. "Huh?" I mumble, and he says, "Shh. Be very still, I think there is someone else in the house." I lay motionless, thinking that someone has broken in and I'm about to be psycho-murdered. Listening to the sounds of the old creaky attic, convinced every gust of wind is a footstep. He puts his arm around my head, covering my ears. I don't move for hours in fear, until I hear him snoring. And that was the night I discovered, for the first time, he talks in his sleep. Edit. Thanks for the silver. To celebrate, I'll share one of the many other stories of his sleep talking. We were in bed discussing things we need to pick up at the store. I was making a mental note: so, eggs, milk, bread. I think that's all. Anything else? He goes, "Oh, can you add rope to the list?" I go, "Yeah, sure." A few seconds pass. "Wait, what do we need rope for?" "For the net," he says. "Cool. What net?" "You know, the net for the trap." "What trap?" "The trap for Vince Vaughn. We have to stop him. Stop him before he kills us." I was watching a friend's kids when I was in the army. I was crashed out on the couch early one morning when the door flung open and 3 kids that didn't live there entered the house. The one in front had a gun. They were making a beeline for the kids' bedrooms and had not noticed me on the couch. Scared as shit but not gonna let them just kill the kids I was watching, I jumped up and barreled into the lead kid and took the gun. There was screaming and the kids I was watching came running out into the front room. Turns out it was a BB gun. The kid with the gun had just received it as a gift and wanted to show the kids I was watching. The visiting kids had been told by the resident kids that their rents were away for the weekend, so they just barged in. Of note, they were all like 13, so it wasn't exactly hard to take the BB gun. Still scared shit out of me. I had hallucinations from a fever while staying over at a friend's and thought the dad was just downstairs screaming all night. It was like living through a horror movie. I still have nightmares about it almost 20 years later. The fever was so bad I had a seizure the next day. It's good to know I'm not the only one who hallucinates when having a severe fever. Didn't know this was actually a thing. I've found myself being unable to tell if I'm awake or asleep. When I was around 11 years old, I got exploding diarrhea all over my best friend's bathroom. I got very close with her mom that night because I had no idea what to do, and she came and helped me clean it up. We grew apart after we graduated high school, but she still reminds me of it sometimes. Now it's funny, but it was traumatizing at the time. I was spending the night at a friend's place in early high school. We were taking a walk around the block and turning onto her street when her little sister runs out of their house and screams bloody murder. She starts running for us, yelling he's killing her, friend's name. He's killing her. We all run to the house where the mom is getting beaten by the stepdad. It was a scary night for sure. About 14 years old. Sleeping over at my friend's house, and in the middle of the night we heard some rustling around in her enclosed patio, which was adjacent to the living room we were sleeping in. We shrugged it off because she had 2 very active outdoor cats who generally slept in the patio. When we woke up the next morning and went out there to eat breakfast, we saw the screen door had been slashed and several pieces of furniture, TV, etc., were gone. So the rustling we heard in the middle of the night were actually burglars. Not sure if they knew that several teenage girls were in the living room, but still freaks me out a bit when I think about it. Slept over at my friend's house one summer night during high school. Woke up to his mom calling out to him because his stepdad was unresponsive and passed away during the night. That's some shit timing. Cause of death. The doctors weren't sure at first but came to the conclusion that it was a widowmaker heart attack. I was 11 and at my friend's house, his parents and all of his siblings were home. Everyone but his dad was in the front room of the house. His dad was doing yard work in the backyard. I got up to go to the bathroom, and while passing the back door saw that my friend's dad was on a ladder with an electric tree trimmer. Before I looked away and continued on, his dad fell off the top rung of the ladder and crashed hard on the ground. The tree trimmer was still somehow on and landed next to his body. The trimmer was going full horror movie and slowly moving towards him and he was not getting up. I'm the only one who saw this happen. So I yelled, friend's mom. Your dad fell, come quick, and ran outside to pick the trimmer up and move it away. By the time I turned it off and started focusing on him, everyone else was outside. We helped him up, the mom took him to the hospital for back pain and a mild concussion, the older siblings watched us while they were gone, and everyone was very thankful I had to pee. Edit. It was scary to me because I did not know what to do and acted on adrenaline and instinct. The fall was also pretty intense looking. I thought I saw a guy die. My friend when I was around 10 years old used to talk about a ghost in his house that would turn on the radio in the kitchen when you left the room. Called bullshit. Well, about a month after, I am waiting on him to get out of the shower, and am in the kitchen having a snack. As I open the cabinet, the radio behind me turns on. I jumped, turn it off, then remember the story. Was afraid to go to the kitchen after that. Scary, but only happened the once to me. His mom didn't want to throw it out or move it in fear of angering whatever it was. Not sure whatever happened to that radio. Stayed with my BF and his parents for a few weeks. One night, they left me home alone for a few hours. I decided to take a bath. Ventilation fan is on full blast, door is closed, water is running, so I don't hear the beeping. When I turn the tap off, I hear alarms blaring and a robotic voice saying fire, 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 and someone is banging on the front door. I run downstairs in a towel while calling up my BF. Neighbor is at the door because he heard the alarm. He has no idea who I am. Alarm company couldn't get a hold of anyone so they called the authorities. Cop cars, ambulance, and fire trucks show up, neighbors all crowd on the lawn. I'm still in a ducking towel. Firefighters conclude the steam from the bath set off the alarm. I die of humiliation and never take a bath there again. Age 6-8ish. Slept over at a friend's house with my little brother. Her father woke us all up in the middle of the night, had us bundle up, and loaded us in the family minivan. He drove to a gas station and talked the whole way about how a bakery exploded behind their house. He said the resulting gases and such could kill us, so we had to try and drive as far away as possible. They were also our next door neighbors, so I was worried about our parents' safety. At the gas station, our friend's mom bought us snacks while he canvassed the area. I told her I didn't hear any explosion and asked about my parents. She must have called them from a payphone during the snack run, because they pulled up a few minutes later to take us home. I was, of course, terrified to go home. Later, our parents sat us down to explain that our friend's father was sick with something called schizophrenia that makes him hallucinate. Edit. Thank you for my first silver smile. I was a freshman in college when I spent Christmas with my high school buddy who didn't go with his family out of town. I went to his kitchen to get a drink when I looked out his kitchen window and saw two figures jumping his fence. Luckily I saw them before turning on the light, so they didn't see me. I quietly told him to get ready to call the cops, when I saw them making their way to his door. Without thinking I ran to the door and opened it and yelled, "LAPD. Freeze." And luckily the two figures got scared and ran away. Thinking back on it, they sounded really young and they were probably just gonna ding-dong ditch the place or something. But to be safe I stayed with him until his family came home. Plot twist, he lived in NY. When I was like 8 or 9 I was at a relative's house for a family gathering when one of my distant relatives flipped out and grabbed a kitchen knife. I don't remember the details but I'm pretty sure he was threatening people. I remember being ushered into a side room with everyone else and being cramped in there for like a minute or two just listening while a few male relatives who had remained outside with the guy encircled him, got him to calm down, and disarmed him. I learned later that the dude's brain was like partially fried or something from drug abuse. Never saw him at any family gatherings again after that. I was 18 and my friend and I were alone at her house. Her parents were going through a nasty divorce and her dad, who had anger problems, was not allowed to come near the house because the mom had a restraining order. He ended up banging on the door and trying to break in since he knew the mom wasn't home. We hid in my friend's room with a samurai sword while she called her mom to come home. While you were filing a restraining order, I was studying the blade. Probably a really good time to start studying the blade. I was cat-sitting for some family friends. As I approached the house one evening, I noticed a light was on that hadn't been on that morning. I walked in the front door and yelled up the stairs, but didn't hear anything. There were small things that had been moved around, a knife on the counter and some trinkets, etc., but nothing was missing except the cat. It never came running for its food. I checked all the rooms but no sign of the kitty. I even checked the fridge, and noticed the pepperoni had been moved from the shelf to the drawer. Why did the cat burglar move the damn pepperoni? Well, it turned out that the family had a maid that I didn't know about and she had accidentally closed the cat in a closet. One of my friends from childhood would have really bad night terrors. She would either wake up in the middle of the night screaming at the top of her lungs, or she would randomly jump up and start running for the front door trying to get away from whatever she thought was chasing her. It was always pretty terrifying waking up to her screaming or tripping over me while trying to get to the door. Ah geez, this was my childhood too. Only I was the one having the night terrors. I still have them from time to time and feel bad for my husband for having to deal with surprise nighttime ear screams lol. I house sat for my childhood crush when we were 12ish as her family went on a 6-week road trip around the US. They had a cat and a bird, and you see where this is going. This stupid little finch got out of its cage, legit. The cage was closed when I returned the next day, and the cat killed it. I was obviously scared out of my mind of being the guy who killed Crush's bird, so I did the only logical thing and went to the pet store and bought both of the finches they had that looked identical. I had about 2 weeks to figure out which was more like the cat bait, and then, not knowing what to do with the other, I kept it. They never found out, or told me if they did. And that's the story of how I ended up with a pet finch. Edit for questions. House sitting was the wrong world. I went over every day to feed their animals, bring in the mail, etc. They lived pretty close to me. Y'all are some sick ducks. We were 12. My mom had finches too, hence why I was tasked to take care of this one. We just added it to their flock. The cage had slide-up doors for the food and water tray. I'm convinced that's how the bird got out. Forgetting to ask for a towel prior to getting into the shower. Oh god, you just dredged up a memory I have of sleeping at a friend's house when I was about 10. I was already in the shower when my friend came in and announced that her dad wanted a shower after me, and the towel I'd grabbed was the only clean towel, so her mom told her to take mine. I had to dry off with my dirty PJs. That's messed up. As a guest, you would get the last anything in the house, and my husband would have to figure something out. Was playing hide and seek at my best friend's house, found an awesome spot under his parents' bed when I looked to the side and saw a human foot, with a calf attached, wearing a shoe and everything. I felt my soul leave my body and made up some excuse and ran home. Turns out his mom was an amputee and it was her prosthetic leg, but didn't know until my parents mentioned it a while later. I was 14 or 15 and spent many weekends at my friend's house. One day we discovered that her mom's boyfriend has a hidden camera in her room, under her desk. I was supposed to go on vacation with him and my mom told me she didn't feel comfortable with him. We found that camera a week later. Thanks Mom. I was around 12. Wanna see a cool trick? Sure. Friend proceeds to bang his head against the wall, then falls flat to the ground and barely breathes. I panicked. We were alone. Turns out he wanted to prank me but actually passed out, woke up while I was panicking and decided to keep to his act. Also, when I was 16, this guy's dinner table was full of coke I didn't use, and we suddenly heard sirens and saw blue flashes through the window. We heard them kick a door and yell for a bit. Turns out it was a drug bust next door. Lovely neighborhood. I think I was about 7 or 8 at the time. I remember being at one of my crush's house for a pool party he had. We were swimming, and I think it was from the Lizzie McGuire movie, I could be wrong, where I saw a girl and a guy swimming and flirting by pushing the other person's head underwater. So, as you may guessed, I did this to the guy. After I did this, he did it to me, but for way longer than I did it. I couldn't breathe and I remember I had to get out of the pool and sit down for a bit to catch my breath. Yeah, I don't think he got it as me flirting. This happened when I was like 8. I went over to this girl's house, really liked her. Her older brother told us about Bloody Mary, and she was ecstatic to try and summon her, so she asked me to come with her, and of course I said yeah. So we go in there, turn off the lights, shut the door, she starts chanting it, and the brother starts pounding on the door, screaming. When we tried to open the door, it was locked, and he kept pounding and screaming, "Oh God, she's got a knife, help." After like a while he finally let us out, laughing his ass off. Mirrors ducking scared the shit out of me until I was 16. And I am still wary of them to this day. Edit, he didn't lock it. He was leaning against the door or put something against it. I used the word lock to describe that it wouldn't open, sorry about the confusion. Not technically in someone else's house, but I was babysitting a special needs 2-year-old, and the kid wanted to go play outside. No biggie, but since it was fall in Alaska I wanted to make sure that it wasn't too cold out. I stepped outside to check their thermometer. The door locked behind me. I had no phone, and since it was Alaska the closest neighbor was too far away for me to leave the kid alone in the house to get help. So I ended up ramming into the door in a panic until the lock broke and I could get in. The kid was okay, got in the laundry but otherwise had no idea anything was wrong. I thought I would get in trouble for breaking their door but the mother said I could have broken a window and she wouldn't have cared. The mom paid me $50 for it, though, and that's a lot of money for a 12-year-old. Edit, to be clear, I didn't break the door itself. Just the lock. Their lock wasn't a standard deadbolt or anything. It was a gate latch that was opened by a hidden string on the outside. The door couldn't be unlocked because the string had wrapped around the locking bolt, so it would pull tighter the more it was pulled. I opened the door by slamming against it enough that the bolt bent and I could get my fingers in there to lift it. It took a good hour or two of bashing the door. They replaced it with a deadbolt the next day. And I was the 12-year-old, the kid was 2, and the mom was in her 30s, Sorry if that wasn't clear. My friend's stepdad tried to give me a massage while he was drunk. This was when I was really young, like 7 or 8. And it's one of those memories where I'm not sure if it was real, or just a crazy dream, and it was too long ago to tell, but I'll tell it anyways. Was with a childhood friend at his house in the boonies. He lived in a real rundown house, but his neighbor down the road was pretty affluent, with a great house. He said he wanted to go exploring, and being a kid in the desert, I was down for that. He led us to the house, where he somehow convinced us to climb through the guy's doggy door into the house. Pretty great house, I still remember the layout vividly. Anyways, here we were, exploring some random guy's house, when we hear a door open. My friend had thought the owner wasn't home because the neighbor's car wasn't in the driveway, so he thought we were safe. We sprinted and hid behind separate leather couches in the guy's living room. He came out into the kitchen, wearing a bathrobe and nothing else, and got a glass of water, reading a magazine. We watched him from behind the couches as he took his time and finally went back up the stairs. We sprinted out of that house and back to my friend's house, and I don't think Usain Bolt himself could have beaten my 7-year-old sprint. It was pretty scary then, but it's absolutely terrifying now to think what could have happened. TLDR snuck into a random guy's house with a friend as a kid, almost got caught, will never break and enter again. When I was about 16 I had spent the night at my best friend's house. During this time there were rumors going around that I was gay because I came out to a previous friend who decided to share it with others. My best friend knew of my sexuality but it did not bother him at all. During this sleepover, I remember laying on the floor while he was in his bed. I was still laying opposite to his head which angled me towards the opening of his bedroom door. In the middle of the night I get this jolt of adrenaline in the middle of night as I had the feeling that someone was watching me. I still had the cover over me and made a hole shape to peek out of. The door was cracked open. It was completely shut before we both knocked out. I stared deeper into the crack and noticed what looked like another pair of eyes staring back. I get this horrible pit in my stomach as the eyes continue to look around the room. Right up to the point when it locked onto my eyes. The door began to crack open wider. I see a full head peek its head in at an attempt to get a closer look of something. When all of a sudden this thing bursts the door open shouting "I caught you!" while removing the covers off my friend. My friend immediately shouts "What the duck" and flicks on the light switch. It was his mother. She stormed out of the room and slammed the door to her room. Me and my buddy had a hard time falling back to sleep as we were trying to figure what that was all about. The next morning I overhear my friend D talking to his mom while I was in the bathroom. Apparently she heard I was gay and that she always had a feeling. She was trying to catch if I was doing stuff to him in his sleep. Ducking ridiculous was my reaction but I washed up and told my buddy that I would be going home. Her head popping in was some scary shit. Never told him why. We are still best friends, I just avoid his mother. The daycare my little sisters and I went to was down the street from our house. One day my then 2 or 3-year-old sister told my mom her private area hurt and that won't use the real name but it was the daycare lady's husband, had put something in there and that it hurt really bad. My mom obviously took her straight to the doctor where they had came to the conclusion that she was definitely penetrated and the authorities needed to get involved immediately. Well before the ball could get rolling on that, the daycare lady had informed us that her husband had left town and had written a note talking about how he had done horrible things that he could never take back and how they would never see him again. Upon the police arriving they had found child pornography. The guy was a photographer, on the guy's private computer involving several kids from the daycare. About a day or two after all of this local forest rangers reported finding a body in the woods by a camp area outside of town. They identified him as the husband with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It gives me chills thinking about the horrible shit that was happening in that house while I was there. Edit. My little sister is doing amazing by the way. She moved to SoCal for school and is working her way to becoming a hospitalist. She's an extremely strong person who graduated high school with a 4.4 GPA despite being homeless with my mom and bouncing around from couch to couch. She's an amazing person. I was in high school and it was the first time I ever drank. I was asleep on the floor and my friend was asleep on the bed with her BF. It was late at night and the lights were off with the music playing. I'm a light sleeper so the BF's drunk dad walked in and started peeing in the room. He didn't notice us there. Hence always wear raincoats. You never know when one may come handy. Edit. THNX for the 2 Reddit silvers. Don't forget to bring a towel. When I was 12 a SWAT team busted through my best friend's house. Turns out her dad was wanted for smuggling people/drugs for the Mexican cartel. Fortunately, they hadn't seen him in several years. He's in prison now. Edit. Wow, people on the internet get mad. This happened 10 years ago. Chill. My cousin brings me to his friend's house. We all hang out in the basement. My cousin forgets his cigarettes and asks if I can grab them from his car outside. I think nothing of it, go grab the cigs and start making my way back to the house. I walk in the house by myself when I run into the friend's dad. This guy's father, who I've never met, just looks me up and down and goes, "Who the duck are you? Why are you in my house?" Mind you, we're in New Jersey and this is an Italian Guido family, so I'm basically getting yelled at by discount Tony Soprano. This guy's flipping out and I'm scared shitless, until my cousin comes storming upstairs and clears everything up. All my cousin had to say was, "Frank, this is my cousin," and just like that, crisis averted. Love you, New Jersey. I was probably 7? My friend lived down the street. Her mom had invited some girls to come hang out from our class and she made us sandwiches, cookies, juice, popcorn, the normal girl day type of fun. We were in the garage playing. Her dad was either drunk or had an anger problem. He came in yelling at us, saying we were too loud. He grabbed my friend's mom by the arm and hit her. She started crying. Then, he grabbed my friend and spanked her. Alright. Well, he proceeded to grab each girl and spank them hard. I ran away as fast as I could back to my house. I remember my friend consistently coming to school being real tired, sometimes falling asleep at her desk. Farah, I hope you're okay. Edit. She moved away soon after. No idea where she went. I did tell my parents. After that, I remember only being allowed to go to one friend's house. Any other time my mom would invite my friends to come to ours. Edit 2, I ran before he got to me. Still told my mom anyway. Edit 3, yes, CPS was notified. I'm sure teachers were well aware of abuse before anyway. They're friendly, 80 pounds, dogs that don't bite tried to tear me a new asshole. In the 3rd grade, so about 8 or 9, I had a sleepover at my friend's house. During dinner that night I had to use the bathroom, and when I finished up my business to return, I couldn't get out. The door handle wouldn't budge and I had to shout for someone to save me. I was stuck in my friend's bathroom for about 30 minutes and it freaked me out a good deal at the time. I was house sitting for an older neighbor who had gone off to visit her grandkids a few states over. I didn't have a place to stay anymore, as the term for the place I was living at was over, and since I'm going off to college soon I didn't want to renew it, so I agreed to do it since she would be gone long enough that I could stay there until I moved in with my grandmother. So I'm sleeping on the couch and I hear panicked voices coming from the back of the house. I was already pretty on edge since I lived in a bad neighborhood and this was basically prime time for petty thieves. So I slip off the couch and start sneaking towards the back of the house and I make it to the kitchen. All the rental properties are laid out the same. You walk in the front door and you're in the living room with the attached kitchen, which was separated by kitchen counter. Off to the side you go into the hallway and you have 2 bedrooms on either side with a bathroom/laundry room at the end of the hallway. So I grabbed a knife out of the holder on the counter and start creeping towards the hallway, and I could hear one of the people freaking out. I could barely make it out since they were in one of the bedrooms, but it sounded like they were holding back sobs. So I flung open the door and flipped on a light. There were 2 kids in the room, middle school kids who went to the school across the street. Turns out they were in the process of robbing the place when I showed up, and they didn't want to go to jail. They thought that they'd be able to sneak away when I went to the bathroom or something, but chickened out because they didn't want to risk getting caught. They sat in that room for hours until nightfall so they could sneak out. It made me kinda sad though. They were kids and their life is going to be a lot more difficult now just because they wanted to be thugs. My best friend's dad was in the reserves and would come home late at night a lot. One time he had come home and we didn't notice. We were heading to the kitchen to go make bread and cheese and we froze in the hallway because we saw someone kneeling in front of the fireplace which wasn't lit. We proceed to freak the duck out, which wakes Dad up and he comes out of his room laughing his ass off. Turns out he thought it would be funny to set his duffel bag up, wrap his coat around it, hat on top, boots in front, and it looked just like some dude chilling with his head on his knees. Ol' Clarky boy, I miss him. He was so much fun. Completely unrelated story with him is he bought a gold VW Golf, and when he came home with it he burst in my friend's bedroom where we were watching Dragon Ball and yells "I love go old" and runs off. He was always doing crazy shit. Edit. Some people have asked for our bread and cheese recipe, so here you go. Get some uncut sub rolls, hollow them out, stuff them with sharp cheddar, and then microwave them till they're gooey and melty. I'm afraid to try it now that I'm older. I'd kiff it'll make me shit my pants or constipate me for a week. Years ago when I was babysitting an infant who was down for his nap. The family had an inversion table and I decided I'd try it out. One of those things where you lay on a table, strap your ankles in and then flip the table so that you're nearly upside down. Well, stupid me couldn't figure out how to flip the table back up so I could get out. Panicking, sweating, imagining the family coming home to this scene with their baby crying in the crib, I was mortified. I'm sure there was some quick release thing, but damned if I could find it. No idea how long I struggled, but I eventually hulked out of it somehow. I still get sweaty thinking about how badly that could have gone. What an idiot. It was my parents' home. They asked me to house sit. The neighbors knew they were gone and called the cops on me. I guess the cops just hung out outside waiting for the presumed burglars to come out, but when that didn't happen and the lights went out, they decided to come in. I awoke to a bunch of cops shouting at me with drawn guns and flashlights shining, blinding me and backlighting, the pistol pointing right in my face. How did you react? And what did you say? And how did the cops respond? Friend's dad showed me porn and asked me if I knew what a hard penis felt like. I was 10. Haven't told anyone I know Earl. This shit is freaking me out. I've got 2 young daughters and always think my wife is over the top when she hesitates about play dates or whatever. This seems way too prevalent. At least my kids have learned what's weird and not, and to let us know if they're uncomfortable or have been uncomfortable. It was a shared house that our ski club owned, up in Vermont. We were renting it for the night, along with a few other families. All was fine until after dinner, when I had to take a particularly bad dump. Naturally, the toilet clogged. I tried plunging, I tried flushing again, I tried other disgusting methods, but it would not go down. Knock, knock. A sinking feeling entered my stomach as I realized someone was at the door. This was the only restroom, and the contents of the toilet bowl were swimming around in a brown soup of disgustingness. I couldn't flush again or it would overflow, and nothing was working, so I washed my hands and explained the situation to the waiting gentleman, who was a portly dude in a wife beater and worn jeans. He told me to get out of the way, which I did with haste. I don't know how he got it to go down, but he did. I apologized like 20 times. It was a terrible, smelly, revolting situation. At least I had enough toilet paper, huh? I have 2. First, when I was a kid I had a neighbor named Z who was also my best friend. I'd spend the night at his house often and saw a lot of things young me didn't realize at the time was very messed up. His parents were drunks and smoked pot. Both were pretty functional. Mom cooked and cleaned, father worked, but it was very clear the couple valued their smoke and drink over their son. Z had an uncle, mom's side, who showed up one day fresh out of prison and started staying with them. Uncle was a nasty drunk. Often got violent with Z's dad and acted like he was the head of the household. One time while staying over, Z and I fell asleep on the sofas watching TV. Uncle came in and unbeknownst to sleeping me woke Z up and became confrontational. I should mention Z and I are about 8 at the time. I was startled awake by yelling and opened my eyes to Uncle shoving, choking and lifting Z up by the neck and slamming him onto the wood flood so hard I felt it from the couch. Z's mom and dad rushed out to help and his mom called the police and Uncle was taken away. I still relive the sound and feel of Z's body hitting the wood floor. It was just awful. Second, in high school I made a seeming normal friend named Jay. She was a little edgy, but who wasn't as a teenager. So I didn't find anything off about her at face value. We hung out at school for a while, then she asked me over for a weekend sleepover. I said sure, why not, and happily went. It is still one of my biggest regrets to date. Jay, for lack of a better word, was and likely still is, a psycho. She showed me what she likes to do for fun. Trade pictures of random naked women with random guys in chat rooms like trading cards or some shit. Also, she broke into her mom's liquor cabinet to drink wine. When her mom got home and saw what she'd done, Jay threw a giant glass vase into her closet so it shattered and then proceeded to walk inside and cut herself on the shards while I sat on the edge of her bed, freaked out but also too scared to say a word because she wasn't upset or crying. She was furious and didn't say a single word the entire time while she cut her arms with shards of glass. Thankfully her mom said she was sending me home as punishment. I'd never been so happy to get out of a situation in my life. Slept on a former friend's sofa. He decided to prank me by pretending to be a bugler wearing a ski mask, then he pretended to try and kidnap me. Long story short, I broke his nose, and we are no longer friends. What if he was actually trying to kidnap you but his plans were ruined, so he fell back on plan B? Haha, got you. This was all a joke. I wasn't really going to sell your organs on the black market. R/oops, didn't me into. Sleepover at best friend's house when I was about 12. Middle of the night after we'd fallen asleep, he wakes up and starts screaming that his head is going to explode. Not a bad dream, he keeps going, just screaming and crying and thrashing around. His parents wake up, scoop him up, and rush him to the hospital. Turned out he'd just never had a headache before, and his first was apparently a doozy. When my soul and I first started seeing each other, I had just recently switched to a non-hormonal BC after having the Nexplanon implant and no periods for 2 years. The second time I went over to his house, I unexpectedly got my period, and I had been warned by my doctor my periods might be a little heavier than before. Little did I know this was a huge understatement. So I'm cuddling with my soul when I realize I'm feeling a little moist, and not the good kind, so I excuse myself to the bathroom. I'm not joking when I say I had a steady stream of menstrual blood coming out of me, and my pants, thankfully solid black, were soaked through. I wasn't expecting my period, so I had no pads or tampons, and my soul lived with 4 other guys who were single, so no feminine products were lying around. The cherry on top though was the fact they were completely out of toilet paper, and I had left my phone in the bedroom, so I was basically stranded on the toilet. Once I realized how ducked I was, I had a panic attack and cried. After what felt like forever, my soul knocked and asked if I was okay, and I told him what was going on. He was really understanding and ran down to the store to get me tampons, TP, and pants. I was so embarrassed at the time and scared he would judge, but it's really funny to look back on. 15. Me and 2 other friends was at a friend's house. Him and his brother were arguing, then his older brother beat the absolute shit out of him. I tried to step in, then he shoved me in the wall, then their father stepped in and started going ham on the older brother. There's always a bigger fish. Then the grandpa busted through the front door and started throwing haymakers at the father. I slept over at my best friend's when I was in grade 4. Her brother had a fight with her mom, and they screamed at each other on top of their lungs. He was very big and began to shake the mom against the wall. My friend wakes up and runs towards them, and brother kicks her. He eventually calms down, and I was traumatized by what I saw. Kinda sad, but just never realized that not all families are like mine. About had a heart attack at 3 a.m. because his miniature pinscher jumped over the doggy gate and landed on my chest while I was asleep. Serious, what's your true supernatural/unexplainable, downright creepy story? I don't think it's supernatural, but it was creepy. My mother died suddenly 3 years ago, 8 days before the birth of my son. There's a picture on the wall of my house of her, and he knows it's grandma. My dad is still in that house, but we have never visited. Partly because I have a mental hang-up about going back there, and partly because of the logistics. It's an overnight ferry. Dad visits us often and I will go back there soon. Anyway, my son has never seen the house and I've never shown him photos of it. He hasn't been to the village, the area or even the country, France. I was showing him Google Maps last week and the thing you do with your phone or tablet where, if you move the device, the field of view moves with you. So I'm showing him our house, his other grandmother's house, his school etc. and he gets it and has a play. My dad lives in rural France so the Google car hasn't done a pass of his street to my knowledge. I decide to check and it's just been done so I drop the pin and open it up. The view opens with the house over the street so I start to move it and my boy shouts grandma's house. A bit taken aback I ask how did you know that? Because it was. Bit teary so I ask him to point at the window and say which one is the kitchen and he puts his finger on it straight away. Which room does daddy sleep in? Again the finger on it straight away. Which one is grandma's? He points to it and says it was that one. Loads of rational explanations etc. but it creeped me out. My family moved to this standard upscale suburban home after roughing it for a couple of years to save up. We also got a deal on the home because it was a model home before it was ours, like had all the fake furniture to show off the neighborhood homes. Anyways, it had this loft area with 2 stairwells that go up to it, one in the front and one in the back. You could pretty much hear everything from this loft since it was so open. One day my 2 best friends, guy and a girl, are hanging out in the loft. We were in HS and they were horny and always all over each other, whether I was in the room or not. We were watching TV and I get up to take a piss. When I left, they were all up on each other. When I came back, they were on different ends of the couch. They had gotten into a fight, so I asked what was up. Your little sister is home, the dude says. My face turned sheet white. What's wrong? The girl asked. I asked them what made them think that. They said they heard her. I am sort of freaking out at this point. No one's here, I say. We checked the house, and I'm right. Well, it turns out that before it was a model home, a family lived there and a little girl had been playing in the loft but had climbed on the railing and fell to her death below. My 2 best friends swear, to this day, that they heard what they thought was my sister laugh and run up the stairs, hitting her hands on each step like she was running up on all fours. I never had any encounters, other than the fact that right next to where she landed was the house's central intercom. We had an intercom system in every room that you could play music through, or talk to each other. Every so often at night at the same time you'd wake up to the intercom button being pressed, and just the blank sound of static airways like someone was holding down the button but no one was speaking. My room was on the 3rd floor and I'd have to walk down to the bottom to the main unit and turn it off there. I always thought I'd see her. When I was in 5th grade I was walking to the bus and it was just breaking dawn. I had to walk about a half mile down a back road with woods lining either side. About halfway down I was surrounded by about 8 or 9 dogs, not wolves, but like actual different breeds of domestic dogs. They didn't make a noise but they blocked my path in a half circle. I was terrified and ran back home and when I looked back they were gone. When I think back on it I hope maybe they were protecting me from an unknown danger down the road that morning. Who knows? Last year I was staying in a hotel with my mom. One of the nights as I was laying in bed I noticed a human silhouette maybe 2 meters away from me. I figured it was just a shadow so I tried to ignore it but I couldn't. I turned the light on and obviously it disappeared, but when I shut off the lights again it came back. I tried to convince myself that it was just a shadow, but trust me when I say there was nothing in that room that could have made a shadow like that. I looked around the room several times. It also occurred to me that the shadow weren't there the previous nights, and nothing had been moved around. It looked just like a human silhouette. I never believed in ghosts, but right then and there I was terrified. I was too scared to look at it so I turned around and eventually fell asleep. I told my mom about it the next morning and she just shrugged it off. She said I was just imagining things. Fair enough. That shadow weren't there the next night? Or the next? A few days after we had gotten back home my mom was doing something in the kitchen and I was just sitting there studying. Without turning around my mom said, "Do you remember that shadow of a person you saw at the hotel?" I said yeah. My mom just said I saw it too. My blood turned to ducking ice. Mom didn't want to admit that she also saw it. I thought that she was sleeping, because she didn't want to freak me out. I'm convinced that if ghosts exist, I saw one that night. My mom thinks it was the ghost of her best friend, who had committed suicide just a few days prior. Mom had spent hours earlier that evening writing her a long letter for some kind of closure. Maybe her best friend also wanted to say goodbye. I guess it's not incredibly scary or anything, but it is weird. When I was about 12, our family moved into a new house, new to us, actually quite old. It was in our same village but down a different lane. Part of it used to be a bungalow, so my room and my sister's room were on the ground floor, down a long hallway. All of the ground floor had walnut flooring and there was a Persian rug outside the door to my room to avoid cold toesies in the morning. Every night, around 11 or so, I would hear footsteps walking at a fairly slow pace right down the hall, from the end guest suite up past our rooms and away down the hall to the living room. I was always in bed when I heard them, and so was everyone else. You know how you can tell who a family member is by the way they walk up the stairs, or open a specific door? I knew it wasn't anyone in my family. Plus, it was the sound of outdoor shoes clacking on the wood and everyone in my family wore slippers inside the house. I would hear the footsteps start, fairly loud on the wooden floor, way down the hall, come up past my sister's room, and then there would be a pause, while whatever it was walked over the rug. You could hear the gap in the footsteps, about 3 seconds, then they would start again on the other side of the rug and fade out as they walked down the hall away to the living room. Then they would come back, same footsteps, break across the rug, resumed on the other side. I don't remember ever feeling scared, but I never ever went out to see what it was. I would fall asleep to the sound. It would go on for a really long time. It stopped about 3 or 4 weeks after we moved in and I never heard it again. I didn't really think about it much after it stopped, but I've never forgotten it, and as an adult it makes me shiver to remember it. Creepy depends on your perspective about it, but lost time. My brother was helping me across the country. We borrowed a van and loaded everything up for the last trip. Just before we left I checked my watch and called my GF that we would be hitting the road soon. My brothy checked the kitchen clock but only told me later he did. We set out but couldn't do more than 80 kilometers per hour because of the load. When we took the off-ramp of my new city my brother told me he couldn't remember the trip. When I thought about it, neither could I. We both thought we were tired and thought nothing of it. However, when we arrived at my new house my GF asked if I broke the speed limit because we were almost an hour early. When retracing the route, my brother and I both agreed that we can remember passing a certain gas station and nothing thereafter, until the off-ramp. To this day we have no clue what happened during that hour we're missing or how we could have traveled that fast. Not with any car or van at least. Now at the beginning I wrote we both independently checked for time. This is important for us because one time source could have been wrong but not both. Also I called before we left, which limits the time we could use to travel. Since then we have never experienced any weirdness like it or otherwise. I don't have any weird memories or dreams, no piece of metal lodged under my skin, etc. Just an hour I lost. When I was in high school my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6, respectively. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. When I was around 10 years old, I had this super ducked up dream. It started out with me in my house, alone, during the day. It's a small house, several minutes walk to the closest neighbor and more or less surrounded by woods. I heard something coming down the driveway, like tires crunching in the gravel, but much slower. Went out on the porch to investigate and saw an old-fashioned covered wagon being pulled down the driveway. For some reason, this filled me with dread and I ran back inside to lock all the doors. Once that was done, I walked down the staircase into the basement, where I knew I could see him from the window built into the door. The wagon stopped moving once I was watching, and the man climbed down from the seat and stood in front of I. Was dressed in a black suit with a black top hat and he was looking right at me through the window glass. Once he was sure that I saw him, he walked to the back of the wagon and pulled off the cover. There were people hanging from the supports at the top of the wagon, feet dangling, rope around their necks. They looked dead, but the man in the top hat did something and their heads started inflating. It got to the point where it looked almost cartoonish, eyes bulging out, red faces, the works. He kept looking at me while he did it, and I just knew he was gonna do the same thing to me. Woke up absolutely terrified, and to make things 1,000 times worse, the power was out, meaning it took me a ridiculous amount of time to make my way into my parents' room and camp out on their floor. Here's the creepy bit. I never told anyone about this particular dream because it was so ducking weird. Maybe 2 years ago, my family and I got into a conversation about the freakiest dreams we'd had. I figure what the hell, it's been 10 years, I can probably bring it up without hyperventilating. So I start telling the story, leaving out a lot of details for brevity's sake, and when I get to the part about the wagon coming down the driveway, my younger sister gets the weirdest look on her face, and says, "Was the man wearing a top hat?" We quizzed each other, and we remembered most of the details in the same way. I can't quite figure out how we both had the same dream, though I think a likely explanation might be that one of us told the other about the dream and then forgot. And the other party just constructed their own memory of it. But I distinctly remember not telling anyone about it because I thought it was too weird to share. I still get freaked out when I think about it, and to date, that's probably the strangest dream I've had. Alright, so I grew up in a really small town, and recently it's gotten some fame as being haunted. One of those Discovery Ghost shows filmed an episode here so people got interested. Now, before my town gained a reputation for having ghosts, one night my mom and I were taking a stroll down the main street at night, which we do a lot in the summer. I was about 14 at the time. As we were walking, she stops in front of a furniture store that's in a pretty dang old building. Actually, most of Main Street is, that's closed. We look through the windows, just seeing the merchandise they have, talking, then I turn to my mom and tell her we need to leave. Now. She asks why. I say we need to go. She protests again since she is enjoying herself. I then tell her that there is something bad in the store, it was a bad place, and we needed to go. So we left. The thing is, I don't remember having that conversation. At all. I don't remember looking in the furniture store. I do remember going on walks with my mom plenty of times. But I don't ever remember being creeped out on any of them. The only reason I know this even happened was because my mom told me this story years later, asking if I remember doing that. So big deal, right? 14-year-olds say dumb stuff all the time. But here's why it bothers me. My mom is friends with one of the ladies who works for my town. I don't know what the position is called. Basically, she organizes town activities, and helps out with my town's historic stuff. Anyways, apparently for whatever reasons she gave a tour of the town to a film crew that had a psychic with them. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I think the whole psychic shtick is BS, but apparently once they got to the furniture store, the psychic refused to go inside. Said there was a lot of evil that wanted to harm people in there. So they moved on to other buildings. So yeah, when my mom's friend told her that story my mom told about the time when I was 14, they, and pretty much most people in my town, believe that the furniture store, along with a lot of other buildings, are haunted. But yeah, sorry if that wasn't scary enough, it's the only thing to happen to me that truly unsettles me. I was invited to a sleepover at my friend's house when I was 9 or 10. It was in a crummy, crime-ridden part of town, and I was already apprehensive about the whole thing. Turns out my friend planned for us to sleep in tents outside in the backyard. We go to sleep and I unexpectedly wake up in the middle of the night. All my friends are gone from the tent. Freezing cold and absolutely terrified, I look around the yard and eventually enter the house. None of the doors are locked, and for the life of me I can't find a living soul. I'm practically all alone, scared shitless in my pajamas. I find a phone and call my mom. About 15 minutes later she picks me up and takes me home. Later I found out that my friends had moved to a different tent in the yard without telling me. In my panic during the night, I thought they had all disappeared. Not really supernatural, but in the moment it was the most horrifying, inexplicable thing I ever had the displeasure to experience in my childhood. When I was a baby we lived in a big old manor house with my grandparents. One day my dad woke up in the middle of the night to see what looked like a ghost of my mum on top of the bed screaming and trying to get into my mum's sleeping body. It freaked him out so much that he refused to ever go back to the house and we moved out. When I was about 6 we had moved out and had our own apartment. One morning just after we woke up my mum went to make a warm cup of milk for both of us. It was winter, and the lights were off in the room but were on in the corridor. I can remember vividly seeing the dust come together and a ghost in the form of my mum but dressed like sure was from the 1800s came together and walked out of the room following after my mum and not acknowledging me in any way. It was the most surreal thing that I've ever seen and I still vividly remember it. My grandmother, who died before either my sister or I were born, was a huge Scrabble player and actually won our regional Scrabble championship for the Midwest United States. When my sister was very young, my parents got out my grandma's old Scrabble set to show her how to play, even though she was too young to spell anything over 3 or 4 letters. The game Scrabble starts by each player pulling 7 tiles from the bag. My sister, who I will remind you was very young at the time, pulls out 7 tiles and says, "What does EILOARS spell?" My parents look at the letters and realize that my sister Rosalie, who was named after my grandma Rosalie, pulled her exact 7-letter name from my grandma's Scrabble set. Reposting once again. I am an outdoorsman. I'm very experienced in hunting, camping, hiking, and general survival. I'm very familiar and used to wildlife, and I was charged by what I believe was a cryptid called a dogman. It charged me and my cousin. It was not a bear cannot move how it did, and it was not a normal wolf as they can't comfortably run on 2 legs, whereas what charged us seemed natural at doing. I can elaborate further if you wish. This happened around June or July of 2007, I believe. I was around 17 years old and more cocky then, but still somewhat knowledgeable of the outdoors. My family used to own a cabin in NW, Wisconsin. I basically grew up there in the summer. I knew the woods well, but at night it was wise to stay in a cabin or at least by the bonfire by the beach, because of bears, wolves, and cougars. One of the creepiest things was if you were having a bonfire, the tree line was visible from the fire pit and beach, and at night you always felt like you were being watched from that tree line. But during the day the woods always seemed normal, not so creepy, that is until this incident. So this happened somewhere between 1200 to 1400. Me and my cousin were having an airsoft battle. I was in full woodland camo, he was not. I retreated onto the ATV trail into the woods for a tactical advantage and our battle took us about 200 meters into about a third of the way up the trail. We had enough at this point and were standing at the edge of a clearing on He trail talking and he was maybe 10 feet from me. When I decided to mess with him, I shushed him and said, "We're being watched." He froze. Then I realized the woods were dead quiet and I got spooked and started scanning the tree line and the other edge of the clearing from left to right when I saw it. Its teeth gave it away. It was panting and staring at my cousin. I don't expect you to believe me, but what I saw was a wolf as big as a black bear, at least 300 pounds. But it wasn't normal. This wolf was on 2 legs crouching next to a tree with its arm grasping the tree, grasping with a clawed hand. It had reddish-brown fur. I told my cousin that we have to go and next thing I know he is sprinting and I looked back at Wolfie who had locked on and sprinted a few steps on 2 feet and then I turned and ran when it looked like Wolfie was dropping to all 4s. It charged us and sounded right on our asses barreling through the brush, but for whatever reason let us go when we broke out of the tree line and headed for the cabin. What stuck with me the most was the sheer size. Wolfie appeared to be nearly 7 tall when upright, and that where it should have had front paws it appeared to have large clawed hands. Now I'm not sure how to explain it away rationally. I have heard wolves will occasionally kind of walk upright, but as far as I know they can't sprint on 2 legs, nor do wolves get that big, and black bears more waddle on 2 legs. The closest description is silly, a werewolf or dogman. Thank you for reading. This occurred in 45.983614, -92.359951 Danbury, Wisconsin. We lived in a house that was haunted for a bit. Weird happenings. There was a door on the side of the house that led from the deck into the kitchen. A couple of times per day it would suddenly sound like someone kicked the door as hard as possible. Boom, and the door would rattle. No one was kicking the door. One time a friend was at my house. We were in my room, which was right off the entryway. We heard the front door open, saw someone walk in and go down the stairs to the tenant's apartment. Both of us saw this. I noticed the tenant's car wasn't in the driveway, so we went downstairs to check it out. No one was in the house but us. All doors locked. Creepiest was easily the night I was on the phone with my girlfriend while home alone. I was sitting in the family room. Upstairs was a loft that opened to the main area of the house where I was sitting. Again, I was home alone. As I'm talking to my girlfriend I hear footsteps up on the loft. I turn and look. They stopped. I turned back around and they started again. Did this for a few minutes and I decided duck it and went to my girlfriend's house. So it's about 4 a.m., the beach was a ways away, and my dad and I wake up to go surfing. We make our coffee, turn off all the lights downstairs and leave through our garage door. We close the garage door and start backing out before we realize we forgot something. We pull the truck back in the driveway, open the garage to find the door going into the house wide open and sleeping bags and other stuff on the ground in front of the door. We walk inside and every single light downstairs is turned on. At this point I was thinking, okay, what the actual duck, cause we literally walked out of the house with all the lights off. My dad and I go to check if my mom is awake and she is completely asleep upstairs with the door closed. Weird. Our first thought was that maybe an intruder got into the house and was trying to leave when he noticed we were awake but all the doors were locked. Super creepy. I have an old dog named Casey. When she was a puppy and younger dog she would climb the stairs and lay on a particular step. I think it was like the third or fourth step from the top. She would stick her head between the gap of the step and the bottom railing of the banister and look out over the living room. She would stay up there for hours and sometimes fell asleep with the head sticking out. My mom works at the local high school and every summer is required to take safety courses at the school. One year, at one of these courses, she ended up going out to lunch with several people. One of them she didn't know and began talking to. Eventually my mom mentioned the town we lived in. This other woman grew up in the same town. She asked my mom what section she lived in and my mom said my section's name. Turns out she lived in that section as a girl. Then she asks my mom what street. Lo and behold, this woman grew up on our street. Then it turns out that this woman grew up in the house that we live in. So they get to talking more and my mom mentions that we have a dog named Casey. This woman says that she also had a dog named Casey and then goes on to say that her Casey would sit on the same step that our Casey would and poke her head out from the step. It's not creepy to me, but it's one hell of a ducking coincidence, if not a little supernatural. Growing up, my grandparents had this big, gray German Shepherd called Max. He was a super sweet dog, but my grandparents kept him chained up in the yard and I can't recall anyone ever interacting with him except us kids. When we stayed at our grandparents', I remember bringing leftovers to Max and leaving them in his bowl. My sister and cousins remember this as well. Eventually, my family moved a couple hours from my grandparents, and we saw less and less of Max. He was an old dog to begin with, but I recall he started developing tumors around his neck. Then one day he was gone. I brought up Max to my dad years later as a teenager, wondering what, exactly, he died of. We had a dog that had died recently, and his tumors reminded me of the ones Max had. My dad seemed real confused that I knew who Max was. He said Max had died of cancer, but he was my dad's first dog, which I was confused by, since he mentioned a dog named Boots when he was a kid. He said that Boots was the dog his parents bought to replace Max, who died when he was 9. I was sure he had gotten mixed up, or misremembered the dog. Here's where the story gets weird. My cousins and my sister all remember this dog. I could swear he was dead by then, but even my youngest cousins remember Max. Here's where it gets ducking insane. Where Max was chained up was a concrete platform. When, we thought, he died, my grandparents put a tool shed there. Further lending to the confusion, there are pictures of me and my cousins near my age. I'm the oldest grandchild, but my youngest cousins are 12 years younger, playing with the shed in the background. The fact that my cousins remember the dog makes no sense on that basis alone. That's not the insane part about that shed, though. When I was a teenager, probably 18 or 19, I helped my dad and my uncles tear down the shed. On the concrete platform, right on the edge, was a child's handprint with my dad's name written underneath, and a big, German Shepherd-sized paw print. Underneath the paw print, in the same handwriting, was the name Max. To this day, none of us know why all of us remember this dog. I was born in the late 80s, this dog died in 1969. The year I started high school, my parents moved us into a new house and the place was crazy haunted. I have been suffering from insomnia since I was about 14, and often I would be up in the middle of the night and hear someone running up and down the hallway. Occasionally the running would be accompanied by giggling and the sounds of hands hitting the hallway walls. If I was at home alone cleaning, I would frequently hear what sounded like a small child. It should be noted I did have 5 siblings, but on these occasions I would be home alone, giggling or talking faintly nearby. My parents' bedroom was always cold, and there would be sounds of someone typing on the computer keyboard when no one was nearby it. Several times, I would come into my room, and since I was the first one home from school I knew my siblings hadn't been in there, and my mom never went in there except to try to read my journal, and find my stuff moved around and played with. As in, the porcelain doll my grandmother gave me would be in some random spot in the room, and there would be little dollar footprints on the carpet like someone had been playing with the damn thing. I did some digging later. A little girl was once murdered on the land that the home stood on, before there was a home there. I have a ton of stories about that damn house, if anyone wants to hear them. Not super creepy, and this will likely get buried, but I grew up in the Pine Barrens. I loved living in the woods, and South Jersey has just about no predators, so I never felt unsafe walking around the neighborhood at 2 a.m. or so. Well, one night when I was 19, I left my friend's place about 2:30 to 3:30 a.m. walking home, and I hear the most ungodly sound I have ever heard in my life. In the split second your mind tries to rationalize. First I thought it was a cat being run over, then by 6 seconds I thought it was a woman screaming, then it sounded like a roar/shriek. This is all in the second and a half it takes me to take in the whole sound. Now let me be clear, I had lived in those woods all my life. I know what foxes sound like, I know what skunks fighting sound like. It was like nothing I have ever heard. I have never felt primal fear like I did after hearing that sound. I ran harder and faster than I ever had in my life. When I got to the front door I was already mentally prepared to smash the small glass pane in order to open the door if my sister had locked it. She didn't, and there was nothing interesting after that point. A few other weird things happened around the same time span, but nothing like that. I lost a lot of time, once. It's one of a few very creepy things to happen to me, but this one really got to me. Still does. It only happened a few months ago. I went for a walk with my mother on a local path around a fairly large hill, a regular pastime of ours. We walked the 2 miles from the car to the hill before beginning our ascent to reach the loop, which is only about half a mile encircling the peak. We're from the area and have always known that people have become wildly lost up here, even though the path is the only one around the hill. It's sort of very specific knowledge. If you go 10 miles away no one will know about it. We had been dozens of times before, with the dogs usually, but today it was just my mom and I. We had never been lost before. So we've been walking for I don't know how long, when I noticed something odd. The sun was in the same place to us as it had been for however long we'd been walking, on a circular path. It should have appeared to move as we changed direction. We should also have been reaching the point where you headed down the hill, but our path was completely level. I was taught to use the sun and other natural signs to navigate, as I spent a lot of time just wandering, whether on horseback or on foot. I realized that I had no recollection of that part of the path and had been walking along in silence for. Well, here's the weird bit. Out came my phone and it showed me the time 14:37. I had absolutely no signal, even though it's usually spot on up there. We had set off at 11 in the morning and all the hairs on my body stood up. This was a short walk, an hour and a half at most from leaving the car to getting back to it. The sun should have been above us, but it was set off at where I would have said 3 o'clock for that time of year. I remember the time because when I turned to ask my mom what time she had, she looked straight through me like I wasn't there and remained like that for a whole 3 minutes. She was just staring off into the space where I had been to her left. At 14:40 she suddenly came to life. I'd move away, too nervous to remain under her gaze like that. After about a minute of saying mom and nudging her rigid shoulder in a building childlike panic, I was 20. I was sat on a log just off the path, getting pretty bloody freaked out. Mom glanced around and said in a hollow, weird voice, "I think the fairies might have us, you/hunted_road. We need to keep walking." I scrambled up and fell into match her determined stride on this unfamiliar path. "Why fairies, Mum? Why say that? I wasn't raised to see them as little cutesy people with wings, you see. To me, they're straight out of nightmares, because my mother's upbringing said that's what they are. Creatures out to confuse and trick." "What time does your watch say, Mum?" She always wears a battery-operated analog watch and she lifted her wrist. 2:45. She put her wrist down and lifted it again to check. "That's not right, is it?" I just shook my head. "All right, keep walking." So we did. We trudged on through this unfamiliar woodland for what I would have said felt like at most half an hour. It never turned a corner, or changed elevation. I knew we were in bother when my stalwart, never frightened of anything mother began to get nervous. So, in response to her nerves, she becomes pissed off. She steeled herself, lifted those proud, all-seeing gypsy eyes to the creepy atmosphere and spoke as she would to a lurking person. "Who's toying with us? Put us back." There was what I can only describe as a burst of deep laughter from the path behind us and we spun around to face it. We were at the top of the hill that lead to the gate out of there. It's at the fork where you can go left or right, neither of which I remember choosing, even though we always make a discussion of it. We made our way down the slope and out of the woods as calmly as possible and got back to the car, which was parked next to an ancient church and cemetery. The time in the car? 17:12. We should have got back to the car no later than maybe 1:45 if the walk had gone normally, or just after 4 when our watch and phone said we were approaching 3. We lost nearly 5 hours. I've had a lot of creepy things happen to me, but this is about one of the worst. I wasn't alone, it was the middle of the day on a usually familiar path. Where did those hours go? Where was that path? So many unanswerable questions. I even went up there alone once, to see if I could experience it again, but nothing happened. Just ask if you want to hear any of the other creepy stories. I'll try to make them a bit more brief than this answer. The campus on which my building is located is the old Massillon State Hospital. The Massillon State Hospital was, for lack of a better term, the insane asylum. We have 3 of the old buildings, 2 are occupied and 1 is empty. The empty building is McKinley Hall. The entire campus is private property. We have and will prosecute trespassers due to safety concerns and privacy laws. Well, on to the story. One night, I notice a rustling near the building while I'm doing a grounds check. I radio my coworker and tell him what I saw. He responds, I grab my flashlight and we walk over to the building. It's around 10 p.m., so it's pretty dark out. We figured someone had probably broken into McKinley Hall again. As in, we're telling people to leave and escorting them out probably 5 out of 7 days a week, unless it's September/October, then it's 5 or 6 times a day. Anyways, we creep over to the building and light up the doorway. Sure enough, the door is open. It had been locked and chained. It no longer was, and there was no sign of the lock or chain. So, we creep into the building and are making sure to stay right next to each other, because it's dark and it's creepy and I'm not about to be something's snack. We clear the basement, the ground floor, and the second floor. Nothing but some rats and a whole lot of dust and broken shit. The third floor is where it gets a little hinky. We start at one end and work towards the other side. It's dark, it's creepy, and I do not want to be there. Suddenly it's cold as shit. Now, we've all seen those movies, and we've seen enough of to know that as soon as it gets cold, it's time to go. But, we have to finish securing the building. As we're walking towards the other end of the hall, we see someone. I call out, tell them to leave. They keep walking towards us. My coworker calls out, tells them to leave. They keep walking towards us. We stop and this time yell for them to go. By this point, I decided to use my incredibly bright flashlight to light them up and at least disorient them with the beam. The person is probably 6 feet away by this point, so I flick my light up, and that is not a person. All we see is the distorted face of what may have one point been a human, and we duck and lose our shit. I chuck my radio at it. Radio passes right through its head and it screams, this deathly, piercing scream that can only be made by the unholy spawn of hell it seems to be. So, we turn and run, screaming like small children. It chases us, screaming the whole time, and we barrel down the stairs through the other floors, which are dark as duck and ungodly cold, and finally slam through the now closed door that we had left open. As we're running across the campus, I hear my coworker holler at me and he all but shoves me through another door to one of our occupied buildings. So here we are, on the floor of a building, having tripped over each other trying to get in. He had a handprint on his upper arm and long scratches down his forearm, and apparently I looked like something tried to suck my soul out. We went back the following day to retrieve the radio and there was absolutely no trace of us having been there the day before, where there should have been. No footprints, nothing. However, on the wall, there was writing that had not been there. It read, "What did you do to me? Haven't been back since. Duck. That. Shit." Edit, spelling and punctuation. Edit 2, because someone asked, here are some pictures during the day. A few months ago. Edit 3, I'm uploading all of the pictures and will link to the album. I'll make sure to add links to pictures of specific areas of detail. Posted this story before. I was 11-ish. Fell asleep watching Star Trek Next Generations. About 1 a.m. I feel a weight on the end of my bed as if someone is sitting on it. It's my nanny who's been dead for about 3 years. You're gonna hear and see something in the next few minutes. It's going to scare you, but you'll be okay, she says while patting my leg. But I need to pee, okay, but don't be scared. I fumble my way out into the landing. The window of the front door gets smashed in by a small hand hatchet. An arm starts coming through the door trying to open the old twisty lock on the door frame. Thanks to the wire that was in the glass, the window doesn't fully smash, but the guy is still trying to get in. He keeps attacking the glass with the hatchet and kicking the door. Next thing I hear is my mom screeching at him from the top window. asking him WTF he's doing. He's here to get her son who's just slashed his tires. She doesn't have a son. He calls her liar. She says come in and I'll show ya. That's way he's trying to do, he replies. More curses are exchanged before he decides to smash up the front windows before leaving. Police arrive 4 hours later and can't get DNA from the blood smeared all over the window, 'cause it'll be a nightmare in paperwork. Turns out he attacked our house due to my dickhead next door neighbor ducking into garden when he was being chased. Our tree made it look like he'd run into our house. Ma'am was more freaked out by the fact I'd seen and spoken to my nanny than by the axe-wielding ducktard trying to gain entry into our house. When I was little, around 3 years old, I would have dreams of another little girl who lived on my bookshelf. She had short hair pulled aside with a barrette. She wore a simple dress and shoes with buckles on them. She always appeared as a yellow translucent person. We were friends and I would sit on the floor, and she would sit on the top of the bookshelf and look down at me. We always had fun, but when she got mad she could zap me. It would tickle like being tickled badly by a friend who you wanted to stop. I would yell at her and run away. Fast forward 20 years. While on vacation with my parents we were talking about old dreams and memories when the tickle girl was brought up. I reminisced about the dreams with her, and my parents' faces went funny. When I asked what was wrong they said, honey, those weren't dreams. You used to sit and talk to your bookshelf all the time. We would hear you laughing in the other room. Other times we would hear you get so mad that you would yell, but you were the only one in the room. Gives me chills to this day. TLDR, thought I used to have recurring dreams of the same little girl in my room. My parents recently revealed that I wasn't sleeping when I would talk to her. Thanks for listening to another episode of Reddit. Subscribe and activate the notification bell so you won't miss any stories. Feel free to share your own stories below in the comments. Have a good day.